Okay. Okay. Hello, everybody. Um, today's talk features additional noise generated by construction workers in the distance. Anyone listening to this talk after the year 2019, this is what the urban life of 2019 sounded. I want to continue my discussion on an awareness to modern society and to modernity in some sense. And so, in this modern times of ours, the only thing that seems to be truly changing evolutionary wise, Mr. Within finds, is that we have become we have become more individuals as creatures. I don't know how to say it, but it's pretty much we have become uh, self worshippers, and we worship ourselves through language. In some sense, survival of the fittest also means survival of the mind of the fittest creature, and the mind of the person is in an abstract domain. It's like, where the hell are these words right now that I'm speaking? They don't have locality in a physical manifest sense, but they have design implication. What that means is something can have design, but it could not be real. And that is what we seem to consider our dreams and our imagination. Testaments to unreal design. And so I've personally had dreams where in the dream I wanted to run left, I could run left. In the dream I wanted to run right, I could run right. I had free will in the dream. So what does that really mean? I woke up and I was shocked because it implied that when my physical body is inactive, my mind is active enough to simulate a body and a world. That means if the brains of human beings were connected to advanced technology in the future, there would be a way of that brain to endlessly continue as a sort of the soul of that brain connected to the technology would be the personality that's driving the program. It's a crystallization. It's this is the profound thing about evolution. The purpose of evolution is to be thought, because that's where we are currently. When I ask myself, what did my ancestors live for? They lived for the freedom of their minds, which had to do with unknown experiences, refining knowledge rather than assumptions and safe zones. In ancient Greece, they had this sort of mentality of strength being found after one conquers suffering. You see, everybody has suffering in this life. Literally, every person who you think is better or less than you, they are all suffering the same. Suffering doesn't care how much money you have in your pocket. Suffering happens to all beings. Now, this suffering that happens to all beings makes the human being, this momentary intelligence, prioritize value. It prioritizes value because there's a living attention that has to do something throughout the day, or it will, in some sense, be bored. So what that means is that it's like just like how you have to eat food to stay alive. Your mind has to engage the world to be a mind. This is why they say some have said the brain is a muscle. Like I see that in a profound way, but at the same time, it's as if you don't understand. It's as if we have sophisticated tools to do great experiments with, but the issue is the findings that we get from these experiments are still returning to a world where there is unknown inspiration and known inspiration. Do you know how many human beings on this planet currently, as I speak, are inspired by irrational ideas? Because rationality is much more limited than irrationality. It's kind of like Einstein. He says something like, I don't know if whether the universe uh, is infinite or man's stupidity. And he says, I'm sure about man's stupidity. Something like, I butchered the quote, but it's like something like that, you know? So what he's trying to say is that ignorance is very, very long lasting. There is something called the slumber of the mind. The slumber of a mind is, imagine you're a great painter, then suddenly somebody tells you you gotta go be a baker. Okay, and you're this great painter, you had this, you were at the peak of the evolution of art and whatever, but suddenly you had to go into a different universe and you were baking bread, you know? And it was like that moment in your life where you suddenly have an awareness to a sort of freedom. Freedom tends to arise internally. This is why I've been known to say this quote that be free before you need to be. What that means is when it comes to freedom of mind, it must be an instantaneous access or it's nothing at all. Your life is not just your life. Your life is your whole moment. You must not care for just a certain aspect of the moment. Selfishness is the denial of greater efficiency. That is the issue. It's as if somebody found the secrets of the world, but he decided to hold on to it. And in holding on to it, eventually realized that the only reason he had it was to share it. Every moment changes. This was the chaotic nature of the world that I understood, that whatever I choose to assume or identify as, and by tomorrow it's a new day, and the implication of a new day is that new experiences can redefine the whole outlook on the psychological structure of the being. And these are not being taken into consideration, because if they were, the educational system would be redesigned. The educational system is upside down right now. Do you know what that means? That means it's 8 billion. You tell me, dear listener, that we have 8 billion different people on this planet, different brains with different DNAs. Does it make sense? Everybody's intelligence has to adjust. 8 billion unique DNAs, genetical viewpoints, have to adjust to one educational system? Or should it be the other way? Where schools run to the students, where the teachers are looking for the students. And in some sense, it's as if it's that kind of moment where the teachers are trying to keep knowledge alive in the mind of the species, but they have to have a war. There is a sort of fight that must go on. This fight is the need for, it's like how new ideas are entering the same parking lot as old ideas. And so once there's limited space, there comes a dispute, and a sort of internal existential dispute. I don't want to say it like that. I mean, in my personal experience, um, I thought there was such a thing as normality. And I realized what I'm thinking is normal, and what I think was like a legend, like a mythical legend. These are just different moments with different textures. It's as if, like, are we the hallucination of atoms? Or are we particles within a field of intelligence that we cannot just through language and linear viewpoints comprehend? Perhaps the next great way that the minds of the future generations open up is with this realization that what their ancestors couldn't do was to give themselves enough permission for their true life to happen. I am telling you, there is no point trying to be like anyone. It's a false error. You'll just find a glitch in the system. You're like, it'll be an error. Let me tell you why. Because your mind is your, right? And so how is like, I am ashamed to say it, but the humanity that I see now is still asleep. It's like this: we are on the shoulder of a giant that is sleeping. And some people are like, yo, man, there's no giant. And some people are like, yo, man, there's definitely a giant. It's just sleeping, you know? And so what happens is when this giant wakes up, there comes this ultimate realization. It doesn't matter if there was the giant or not. You are on its shoulder. You must move. So from seeking a joy beyond material suffering, we kind of at first are trying to escape death. I'm telling you, those people who search for truth, 80% of them are trying to escape death subconsciously. I say before you can, it's kind of like how the Sufi dervishes actually used to say. I'll tell you my version of it, but the Sufi dervishes used to say you need to die before you die. Like literally, imagine there was this enlightened spiritual teacher, dervish, and he's like looking at the other people and he's saying, you got to die before you die. That's how you get enlightened. That's how you realize the eternity that could not die. What that means is the eternity that could not die is not a material property. It is how the materialistic reality becomes an effect of an attributeless, unknown, instantaneously present cause. It's as if you thought the number one was a dimension, and number two was a certain dimension, and three was a certain dimension, and four was a certain dimension, and five. You know, it's as if the one who's aware of all these numbers at the same time, the one that is aware that nature has presented itself sequentially. For me, sometimes I'm like, it's not just what human beings are doing on the planet, it is also what the planet was doing before human beings opened their eyes. And those are the true secrets that the civilization needs. Those are the uncharted territories of abstraction. Those are the unconscious kind of skies that Carl Jung was calling forth many people to fly in. And what that means is your intelligence only blooms when you trust it. It's like, believe it or not, it's strange. Based on the dualistic nature of language, the self subconsciously at its core is functioning dualistically. What that means is rather than you seeing everything is happening in one moment, you're seeing that one moment is happening in many ways. You know, when that occurs, when you pretty much because you think you're just this singular physical objective body, right? There is other things you can relate to, right? But the you can say kind of what's the word? It's like before you learned language, your mind was trying to be the world, and the way your mind was trying to be the world dictates your nature. That means I'm like in a lot of these Mr. Within talks, I tell people find your true nature. Some people are like, what do you mean find my true? And what I mean by find your true nature is that, okay, just think about it. You're here temporarily through a certain evolutionary process. That means like the purpose of physical reality is like there isn't that much story to it. Okay, you've evolved, your ancestors somehow miraculously lived on enough for your DNA to exist. It's as if your existence in this world is the victory of your ancestors. Okay, now how this existence continues on becomes how you are approaching the world. Most people, they feel rejected by the world, they feel the world never sees them. This is what I realize. There's like when I looked at cruelty ends up becoming a very multidimensional idea. There's different types of cruelty. There's the cruelty of the rich to the poor. There's the cruelty of the poor to the rich. There's the cruelty of the poor to the poor. There's the cruelty of the rich to the rich. You see? So there is various ways that a system is expanding in a social structure, you could say. So kind of like we got to use the tools that are accessible. The tool that is accessible is language. When we realize our modernity has to do with the new ways that we have chosen to see the world, there arises freedom. To be honest, the world should work kind of like the movie Kung Fu Hustle, where there are these, every human being is like a hidden master of their inner reality. What that means is you have managed to understand everything that your mind, it's like, how can I tell you, when you treat yourself like a multidimensional being, what that means is in the present moment you're seeing an objective component, but you're also seeing a subjective component. Now the strange thing is you only see the subjective component with the eyes of your mind, which don't have shape. Okay, and we say this in another way of saying, this is another way of saying awareness. So the eyes of the mind is how the moment is present. Now, what Mr. Within is saying, something that it arises from my personal experience, is that my relationship with my intuition was a sort of strange relationship with an inner space pattern, a pattern that was emergent in my inner space. That means it was like certain memories were not of a temporal mind. So I find that it's as if like right now I'm speaking to you, but the animate quality of this voice is this moment's voice. You know, a very bold claim is that the collective identity of the civilization is beyond the dimension of the eyes of the civilization. We want such a success that this success is inconceivable. It's as if humans attempted, like there's this great story of the Tower of Babylon, and all the human beings in the world decided, they're like, okay, and they were all united under one language, they all spoke one language. And they decided to build a tower to reach the heavens. And so to reach the clouds and go and speak to gods, go on the level of gods. Pretty much the limited dimension attempted to move beyond its limitation. The story goes that this great tower and wonder of the missing wonder of the world, the Tower of Babylon, it was going, it was about to reach, in some sense, the sky. Okay? Now, what happens? The gods, one of them is about to throw lightning, the other god's like, yo, man, hold up, let me show you a classier way to do this. You know? And what that God does is he makes human beings speak different languages. The moment there is the separation of vision, there is the inability for collective efficiency. And what happens is the moment this God makes human beings speak different languages, they can't work together. When they can't work together, it's as if they can't see the same grander picture, right? The greatest success is one where you are seeing victories in all your moments. What that means is victory doesn't mean just self. The story of the character in your story is happy. You realize that these are just archetypes we journey through. So something that Mr. Within would kind of share a commentary on kind of Carl Jung's kind of certain psychological approach. You see, I tend to be a student of my own experiences, but I have realized that what I consider to be my experience emerges out of a collective context. What that means is, regardless of how much I think I'm a unique soul, the personality is codependent to that which is the impersonal, that which separates itself, right? So these archetypes that Carl Jung spoke, I believe them to be architecture based on language. The mind is a story generating phenomena. How badass is that? It endlessly can generate stories if the attention is directed. I'm telling you, they should teach proper concentration, which is the core of meditation, to children. I've had many views on the educational system for future generations, and it's one where literally they have a class every day where the teacher tells the students to enter, and it's kind of like a Zen monastery, kind of just sitting simply in a natural environment and taking in what happened in the day and just contemplating. You see, the thing is, it's a behavioral disturbance when it comes to, for example, if we look at 8 billion people and we're like, okay, there's no way 8 billion people with every one of them with their whole animalistic instincts and unique kind of mindset, they can all get along. So it's very logical that there will be violence if these creatures want the same things. So what happens is there has to come first a repositioning of the inner attitude towards the outer phenomenon. This this only happens truly through experience. That means at some point you're going to see it's like words can only get you so far, and then the spirit of the world has to move you behind your eyes. So we have had even excuse me, we have had people like Terence McKenna speak about a sort of archaic revival. Now, Terence McKenna is a very unique speaker, and you must listen to him as a unique speaker as a unique listener. So his words are not for all audiences. But what Terence McKenna says, he says something fascinating. He says there's this. I mean, what he says is not new, but he's bringing a new light to it. He's kind of like dressing up ancient truths in modern clothes. This archaic revival is that patterns that were ancient are reemerging in modern times, but through more of a sophisticated analysis on this just viewpoint, what happens is it's kind of like you, based on what you decide was here first. If you, as a human being, decide that the universe was ordered, that means you believe in intelligence to be an ordered origin. Okay? Now, there's some people who believe the world is perhaps not intelligent and chaotic. If you take for your origin principle, for the origin principle of your psyche, if you take order as the foundation, You evolve by you change and evolve through chaos. The good man is always being tested by God to see if he's bad or not. Many things can lead to ideological misery. One of them could be being lost in a box of conceptual validity that's just only valid if your attention's on it. You see, ideas are afraid of people. You don't understand, but we give in to them so easily. I've kind of seen it like this pretty much. I think this is how our species is evolving. It kind of can follow the metaphor of drops of rain joining together and becoming a stream, and streams joining together and becoming a river. And this river, with its immensity, having a completely dimensional shift and going through the waterfall, and then again finding a path to the ocean. When the river enters the ocean, that is when we have become evolved completely and become creatures of mind. You see, right now we are creatures of matter. And I could tell you that the subjective personality, it's like you can say that, I don't know why this number comes to me, but I think 34% of the type of subjective movement that occurs behind people's eyes is programmed. That means somebody said it hilariously, like you live 60 years, one third of it, let's say, they say it's like you're asleep, you're sleeping. Then they say after that, the next thing is just individual survival and activities and tasks, like a video game of survival activities. So if your attention goes to that, eventually you see after you've maintained all these dimensions, what is left, and eventually your sense of multidimensionality becomes what I playfully say onion style. That means like concentric circles, it's like you suddenly discover the unknown. You discover what you knew was in a grander unknown. And then you go discover that unknown and you see again what you thought you knew was less. So there is this constant shift of the value of truth oscillating between self and other. You see, sometimes those people who truth, they externally they say, okay, God is of course not an object to worship, but behind their eyes they're like, God speaks in hidden ways, mystical ways, esoteric ways. Like, what is this? We are playing with clay with our mind. There is the spirit of it's lifeless. It's kind of like, you can say the intention of many esoteric societies was in some sense denied, not by something I said, something somebody said 700, 800 years ago, that if you use only the intellect to comprehend the unknown, literally it's like whipping a dead donkey to run faster. Your analysis of life, or how much you didn't care about it, allowed you to encage it into a story that you ran after to be true. What I'm trying to say is we're such complex creatures that we don't understand the mind is trying to perform in every moment. The purpose of waking life is energetic expression. I remember when I was in Iran, I was dating this girl. To be honest, I saw her only a couple times, and then it's like I realized her mind doesn't meet mine. But we had this kind of spiritual conversation where she brought it up, where she said in her dreams, she can move. She feels her soul can move in dreams. And It was a very strange thing because it was as if she had another life. So after this physical daily life, she would sleep, and in her sleep, in her dream state, she still could consciously move around. Now, whether that dream state is accurate or not, it is a suggestion of a complexity of the mind during sleep. So we say that the brain's kind of dancing uniquely in that hour. It's a strange concept at first when I heard it, but it's this idea of freeing the world. Freeing the world from yourself. A strange concept, but very powerful. It means that you see the hollowness in life, you see its cruel suffering, and instead of trying to escape it, you confront it. There's really two directions in life you can go. Any moment in life, you can direct your attention either externally or internally. That's it. If you direct it externally, you have hope. Things in external reality happen because your attention is on how they happen. But if you become internalized, you become a person who eventually creates space between yourself. And none of these things are wrong. It's kind of like the eagle having the ability to sit on the branch and look at things, a certain branch of knowing, and at the same time flying in the sky of knowledge and kind of seeing the whole forest at once. So what that means is when your attention goes internally, you appreciate yourself because in your solitude, it was easier to accept what you saw rather than what else there could be. There's always whenever there's inefficiency in life, there was at some moment there was fear. The greatest inventions arise from fearless mindsets. That means literally the dude is like, okay, I've in my mind has seen a vision of a certain invention. I'm going to attempt it. It's attention games. I'm telling you. The story of civilization is like we're not even real human beings on this planet. We think we've escaped the programs of nature and we're civilized and we're wearing suits and ties and investing in stocks. Like that is not it. That is not the at peak evolution of our civilization as creatures. So the awareness to modern times comes with the command and the responsibility. A sort of from a sort of individual selfishness to a selfless collective vision. Michelangelo has this quote. He says, "I saw the angel in the stone and I set it free." That means he designed that sculpture so accurately because every second he was attempting for that perfection, his mind was moving forth. Dimensions were being added. Precision was being brought about. You see, it's kind of like this. You got to be very, I think, to some degree, analytical about this. You got to like articulate it and kind of like put it on the table, observe it in that manner. But I'm talking about thoughts, and so what I mean by that is that you ask yourself where the value of your moment is. And whatever you think is out there in the world, you have to some degree, acknowledge it's occurring as your mind is occurring. So, what we see in the world is at first what we are. But if we see something beyond what we are, then what we are is no longer what we see. It's like the roots of the tree are there, but we don't see it. And what's dark matter and dark energy in astronomy supposed to mean? It's supposed to mean pretty much, I think, in a poetic way of saying it, and I'm saying this with a sort of kind of strange respect. Uh, Dark matter and dark energy is just saying it's too dark to see what other forces there are. And there it will forever be dark. That darkness will not go away. The cosmos is too vast. Man's eyes are too limited. Man's eyes are so limited that they have created their own executioner. The executioner of man is time. Time is something that conquers everything. That means when you realize every human being has to confront as much as the constructive qualities of their life, the deconstructive, you can't hide from the chaos that has always been there. Pretty much most human beings, their last moment is pretty much a kind of letting go of all that the physical possibility of life could be. When you're a truly future driven creature, you get shocked when a physical transition comes. Mr. Within is saying, imagine your civilization is not evolved at all. How would you evolve it? And if we have children thinking like this in the future generations, it's as if whatever happens, it's worth it. Because you see, it's all self-worth, is it not? Because when you think about all the entertainment industry and the marketing industries of anything, you see, it's as if the marketers are geniuses. But they are geniuses who, if they had lightsabers, it would be red. Okay? And so let me tell you why. Because they understand that people need to have their attention on something. Literally, the human being has to do some activity through the day to feel as if it has lived a day. Okay? So that activity has to also do with the opportunity that the environment provides, right? So if you were in a religious kind of theocratical kind of society, you could not think a lot of things. Artists are paralyzed, you see, because religion commands an authoritative respect that what can you do? You have to listen. You see, it's the power of an idea, okay? And I'm not saying things are good and bad because morality is incredibly subjective. I'm just saying that we have to care for what took 4 billion years to get here. And we are not doing a good job, and the society's mind is not properly oriented. Literally, I don't know what the world leaders are doing. Like, I hope someone from the United Nations hears this and it's like, oh damn, this guy, like, it's like because we don't realize we are fantasizing over something that we can only see when we desire a truth that's equal for everybody. Do you see? So we gotta realize the limits of the human intelligence, which eventually means that's something that the secular society got correct. The freedom of space to observe, then have a thought and decision to occur. It's as if science is the shield of man, and philosophy is the sword of the mind. You know, science is the shield of the body. Philosophy is the sword of the mind. You know, that's I don't know. By the way, guys, in this live stream, at any point, people can share ideas to kind of branch into other dimensions of other viewpoints of these ideas as well. So the chat section exists. I want to share some quotes from. There's something I do in these talks I give. I say it's kind of like this wisdom quote tunnel, okay? And a quote tunnel is literally I just read a bunch of quotes from one notable person in history, and as I read you the quotes from him, at the same time, we get different ways. We get a sense of in what different ways this guy looked at the world, because each sentence is a way his mind articulated conception. Anyways, let's get into it. Alfred North Whitehead. He says art is the imposing of a pattern on experience, and and our aesthetic enjoyment is recognition of the pattern. Art is the imposing of a pattern on experience, and our aesthetic enjoyment is recognition of the pattern. Sure. It's like if art is the imposition of a pattern on experience, the mind is every moment imposing a pattern on experience, so pretty much every moment is art, he's saying. And the awareness that every moment is art is kind of like you're aware of the pattern that exists. You have understood kind of like you have understood the direction of certain winds that are hitting the you know that are directing the sails of humanity's endeavors. Anyways, Alfred North Whitehead says almost all new ideas have a certain aspect of foolishness when they are first produced. He says no one who achieves success does so without acknowledging the help of others. The wise and confident acknowledge this help with gratitude. Alfred North Whitehead says, without adventure, civilization is in full decay. He says man can acquire accomplishments or he can become an animal. Whichever he wants, God makes the animals, man makes himself. He says true courage is not the brutal force of vulgar heroes, but the firm resolve of virtue and reason. He says, what is morality in any given time or place? It is what the majority then and there happen to like, and immorality is what they dislike. He says it takes an extraordinary intelligence to contemplate the obvious. He says this Alfred North Whitehead is a comedian. Who knows? You know? He says we think in generalities, but we live in detail. Whitehead says everything of importance has been said before by somebody who did not discover it. He says familiar things happen and mankind does not bother about them. It requires a very unusual mind to undertake the analysis of the obvious. Oh, okay. He's not a comedian. He says religion is the last refuge of human savagery. Wow, that's a powerful sentence. Whitehead says the safest general characterization of the European philosophical tradition is that it consists of a series of footnotes to Plato. Whitehead says, speak out in acts. The time for words has passed, and only deeds will suffice. He says our minds are finite, and yet even in these circumstances of finitude, we are surrounded by possibilities that are infinite. And the purpose of life is to grasp as much as we can out of that infinitude. Whitehead says the vitality of thought is in adventure. Ideas won't keep. Something must be done about them. When the idea is new, its custodians have fervor. Live for it, and if need be, die for it. Yeah. Anyways, he says the total absence of humor from the Bible is one of the most singular things in all literature. Okay. Whitehead says there are no whole truths. All truths are half-truths. It is trying to treat them as whole truth that plays to the devil. Whitehead says art attracts us only by what it reveals of our most secret self. Wow. Whitehead says it requires, he said, I read that. He says, philosophy begins in wonder, and at the end, when philosophic thought has done its best, the wonder remains. Whitehead says no period of history has ever been great or ever can be that does not act on some sort of high idealistic motives, and idealism in our time has been shoved aside and we are paying the penalty for it. True. You know, it's a half-truth kind of true. Whitehead says, I don't know if I read this, he says ideas won't keep, something must be done about them. He says, I have suffered a great deal from writers who have quoted this or that sentence of mine, either out of its context or in juxtaposition to some incongruous matter which quite distorted my meaning or destroyed it altogether. Well, that's the sacrifice of the philosopher. Once you share your mind with the world, it's no longer just your mind. It's like when you share your art with the world, every person sees their own dimension. So you cannot control how the eyes of the world approach your artwork. So Whitehead, is being a bit of a sensitive person in this moment, I find. Anyways, he says, human life is driven forward by its dim apprehension of notions too general for its existing language. Yeah, pretty much the unknown inspires. Whitehead says, fools act on imagination without knowledge. Pedants act on knowledge without imagination. I find that the mind shifts so many times that we cannot define it in certain movements. Whitehead says civilization advances by extending the number of important operations which we can perform without thinking of them. Whitehead says periods of tranquility are seldom prolific of creative achievement. Mankind has to be stirred up. He says if a dog jumps into your lap, it is because he is fond of you. But if a cat does the same thing, it is because your lap is warm. He is a comedian. Whitehead says every philosophy is tinged with the coloring of some secret imaginative background, which never emerges explicitly into its train of reasoning. Wow, wow. That sentence is he's spot on. Whitehead says seek simplicity but distrust it. Whitehead says life is an offensive directed against the repetitive mechanism of the universe. Very true. He says speech is human nature itself with none of the artificiality of written language. Whitehead says intelligence is quickness to apprehend as distinct from ability, which is capacity to act wisely on the thing apprehended. Whitehead says the deepest definition of youth is life as yet untouched by tragedy. Whitehead says everything of importance has been said before by somebody who, oh, okay, I think we read this. Whitehead says knowledge shrinks as wisdom grows. Whitehead says the task of a university is the creation of the future so far as rational thought and civilized modes of appreciation can affect the issue. Whitehead says Whitehead says the absolute pacifist is a bad citizen. Times come when force must be used to uphold right, justice, and ideals. Whitehead says wisdom is true ambition's aim. Wisdom is the source of virtue and of fame, obtained with labor, for mankind employed, and then, when most you share it, best enjoy. Whitehead says fundamental progress has to do with the reinterpretation of basic ideas. He says it is the literature that the concrete outlook of humanity receives its expression. It is in literature. Yeah, very true. Woo. So let's step out of that wisdom tunnel. So, ladies and gentlemen, like there's many viewpoints you can have, but eventually, after you've lived for yourself, you'll wonder why yourself exists, and yourself exists to relate to everything else. Because it relates to everything else, your mind actually is creating the experience of others behind their eyes. So this is so crucial to comprehend because that means no, you don't know anybody. Like imagine you never knew how deep people thought. You don't know how many years they had lived. You see, this is why you respected your elders because they had lived, they had seen the world move in ways uh, before you were alive. You know? So what that means is like they've seen more of this film and they have a better sense of where it's going. You know. Your life is, to be honest, an incredible art gallery. It's like before the artwork has any meaning, you have the eyes of pure design. Consciousness first learns the language of design, and after it learns the language of design, from the language of design comes the language of mathematics. You know, we think geometry is a part of mathematics. No, mathematics is a part of geometry. You see, because design is so crucial. It is fundamental to three-dimensional experience, and so how would I say it? Like after your eyes are open, you want. If we say we're a bunch of people on a rock in the middle of nowhere, we see that the stories we tell ourselves are the stories we tell ourselves, is it not? This is why I say you're not a thought, because thoughts come and go. They come and go and die. They live and die. How can I say it? It's like Chun Tzu said, your thoughts are like leaves on a tree. Like as the seasons pass, they change. The cyclical nature of the laws of the universe is pushing you, whether you like it or not, to constantly change. Your body has to have like wakefulness and then rest. You need to experience a bit of sensory data and then you need to close your eyes and not experience that sensory data. You see, life is a balance, and this balance is not something you can pinpoint. So there's no point of planning for future balance because you don't know what the world brings. It has to do with how you what ideals behind in your what subconscious ideals you're calibrating to. This is such a crucial concept because Mr. Within is saying there was a time where it was important to learn from other people. So that time is still happening, of course, in your life. Be a student in every moment and learn. But I'm saying, like, realize that um, the student in the classroom is realizing their mind is their true teacher. So Mr. Within is saying you have unique DNA. Nobody else has your eyes. So in some sense, I don't know how anybody else can help a person to help their attention change when they have free will. You know, literally, if somebody is being how is the story of the world evoked? That suggests kind of your emotion, what emotions you bring to the table to this. So, anyways, guys, thanks for tuning in. There's two people watching. If there's any thoughts or comments, I'm curious to see how these talks are coming across. To be honest, guys, I feel like I should end off soon. Before I end off, of course, if there's any comments or anything you can share. But I wanted to share a quote from this Indian polymath by the name of Rabindranath Tagore. Rabindranath Tagore, he says, I slept and dreamt that life was joy. I awoke and I saw that life was service. I acted, and behold, service was joy. I acted, and behold, service was joy. It is the evolution of that. It's like the evolutionary urge is being recalibrated to its efficiency because it has managed to see it. If you see in your mind the possibility of something to be real for you, that is the first attempt. Sometimes you gotta keep ideas alive, or you gotta nourish them with your attention, or they don't evolve. Anyways, thanks for tuning in, guys. Much blessings and rise, mankind. Rise.